We will continue with Paolo Ruffino. Paolo is an academic and an artist, originally from Italy, living and working in London the last few years. His research lies in the fields of video game studies, media and cultural studies, art criticism, semiotics, and philosophy of language. He's now finishing his PhD at Goldsmiths, where he also teaches as associate lecturer. His PhD research involves the study of new forms of production and consumption in the video game industry and phenomena such as modding, independent gaming, open engines, and game art. Since 2012, he's also a research associate at the Gamification Lab at Leuphana University. And it is very important, of course, to mention, as you may of you know, that he's a member of the artist group Io Cose. The title of Paolo's talk is Playing with Lives.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Daphne, for having me here. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is, of course, the quantified self movement and gamification. But particularly, I'll start talking about how these trends connect with some of the contemporary practices of the video game industry. And I'll try to complicate the oppositional approaches to this trend as they've been adopted by gamers, hackers, and artists. And in particular, I will look at one of the projects that I've been doing as part of the collective Io Cose, which I'm one of its founding members. All right, so let's start saying that quantification, tracking, monitoring are now very common practices in the game industry. So if you consider the examples of Sony's PlayStation Network or Microsoft Xbox Live, it's pretty much impossible to even start playing a game without being logged in and being online. These services require you to be registered and signed in. So latest generations of game consoles offer this possibility of sharing images and videos of your playing session, connecting with friends, engaging with other players, watch movies, TV series, and listen to music, etc. However, users are also required to be always online. And this is used for, of course, keeping track of their actions and therefore for the profiling of users, which means understanding their habits, tastes, etc. So it's very tempting to create an easy opposition here. On the one hand, we have like the interest of multinational companies such as Sony and Microsoft, who are now promoting forms of gaming where users have to provide their personal data, even just to start a video game. And on the other hand, there might be forms of opposition to the continuous monitoring and record of personal data, or maybe forms of escapism from the strict control of the video game companies. Examples of these forms of opposition can be seen in the PlayStation hacking case, which maybe some of you are familiar with, mostly emerged around 2010 and 2011, but has been recently repurposed on Christmas Day last year, where both Sony and Microsoft online gaming systems were made inaccessible. However, these forms of opposition are not necessarily easy to understand in around one main concept. They are very different from each other. Sometimes hacking attacks are carried for economic interest, simply for stealing the sensitive data of users. In a recent conversation that I had with Rob Gallagher, a postdoc from King's College in London, he's currently proposing a study on the pervasive rhetoric of the advertisements and promotional material that Sony and Microsoft are now using to promote their online gaming services. And Rob is looking at how offline single-player gaming is now becoming more and more stigmatized, similarly to how forms of sexual practices such as masturbation were condemned in the Victorian age. Of course, the references to Foucault's history of sexuality. So, while playing off the records is often seen as an antisocial behavior or a waste of time, multiplaying online instead, while of course being logged in on Sony and Microsoft's services, is often presented as a positive behavior. However, playing offline or off the records might not be necessarily a very effective practice of resistance. I would say that mostly the problem with this sort of oppositions is see on one side the interest of companies that try to collect and archive data about their users, and on the other the practices of resistance that are trying to counter this trend, tend to overlook the differences between the many different products, games, services, applications, etc., that are currently attempting to create profiles of their users by collecting data and making this process of data collection an essential part of the very experience of the consumer. And these practices of archival of personal data can also be seen as going in a similar direction to what is now called the Quantified Self, or QS movement, or the gamification technique. They are similarly proposing new forms of collection of personal data for the delivery of specific services or for the creation of a playful environment, but still mostly basing their businesses on the archiving and profiling of users' data. So the man you see on the right is Michael Nagel, one of the leaders of the QS movement, well, self-proclaimed leader of the Quantified Self movement. Okay. Examples of QS and gamification technologies are in fact very different from each other. So we have examples such as the MyFitnessPal calories counter app, different sorts of body monitoring devices and technologies. I'm not sure how many of you have ever been using this calories counter app. I've tried it. I use it daily, and it's not working. So MyFitnessPal, for example, is basing its business on collecting data about the diets of its users and then sending back promotional material based on the consumption of and habits of each user. Other examples may be more famous, Foursquare and Stack Overflow, which are very often considered as seminal examples of gamification. So in Foursquare, relatively common practice, such as going places, reviewing restaurants, is kind of collected around one single online service, which is essentially then trying to sell you advertisements based on your own tastes. And in Stack Overflow, the practice of assistance from programmer to programmer is used also for selling contacts to potential employers in the IT industries. So of course, all these examples are different from each other, but they do have something in common. But I believe this is less in their business models or method for data collection. Is what keeps them together is mostly, I believe, the idea that data collection can somehow provide information on the individual, an information which is personal and transparent, that reveals an otherwise inaccessible truth about the individual. However, this principle of truth that underlies the Quantified Self movement has been critiqued by Gary Hall in 2011, mostly for its political implications. So Hall argues that the idea of the transparency of data and of the very possibility of acquiring data as a transparent process is compromised by the necessary presence of an agent who decides how and why this data should be acquired in the first place. Transparency is contextually defined by that same agent who is collecting the data, a process that is not necessarily transparent in its methods and purposes. So Hall argues that metadata, as the key principle that makes data hierarchically organized and accessible, is what undermines the notion of transparency, as it introduces a contingent perspective into the organization and collection of data. Thus, the alleged transparency of data ultimately relies on a rather opaque point of origin. This is, of course, something that other speakers in this room have been talking about more and better than me in the previous days. So let's have a look at an example, and let's see how this actually happens. So let's see this advertisement by Nike, the sports company. It's been promoting its Nike Plus wristband, which I also use on a daily basis. This is also not working. The Nike Plus wristband, as maybe some of you know, it's a device that keeps record of your own movement through an accelerometer that is in the wristband. So let's have a look at what Nike is trying to sell us.
Our minds, our bodies, and our experience all tell us that movement is life, and that the more we move, the more we live. It's something athletes have understood from the beginning. The kind of movement it takes to improve your game is the kind of movement it takes to improve your life. But unlike sport, life doesn't come with convenient ways of measuring movement. So we developed one, Nike Fuel, a single universal unit, uniquely designed to measure the movement of the entire human body for the entire human race. Whatever your weight, whatever your gender, whatever your activity. It's that simple and that revolutionary. So get out there, find what fuels you, and get moving.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so Nike. So what is Nike talking about here? So they are talking about life, more specifically. But what sorts of life is Nike talking about? They say life is movement, as the video says. The life of a human being is allegedly equivalent to a movement. A movement is quantified through an accelerometer, the one that you see in the Nike Plus wristband. So it's a very specific notion of life, a notion that assumes that life can be counted and will be counted by a wristband, and it will let Nike Plus users improve their own lives by improving their Nike Fuel score. So Nike is proposing a specific organization of data, a method for its collection, archival, and evaluation, and they're calling it a system for measuring life. Now, if we accept this notion of life, then I propose that we can also imagine alternative ways of playing with it by repurposing this method of data collection and the principle of truth underlying it. Yes. Okay. So an example of this that I would like to talk about today is the Drone Plus project that I've been working at as part of the group IOCOSE. So Drone Plus is a video documentation of a drone attempting to run a 100 meters race and recording its own activity through the mobile app Nike Plus. The drone has been running the same race for 1 month every day, producing data regarding its own speed, time, and covered distance. However, while it successfully crossed the finishing line most of the time, it also sometimes, actually often, failed. And the reason for its failure were mostly technical or due to the weather conditions and so on. So successful races occurred only occasionally and never showing any sign of improvement. I'll show you what we have done here. Okay. So, yeah, Drone Plus. Drone Plus is part of a broader series of projects that we have been doing called In Times of Peace. In this series, we have been trying to explore the possibility, or rather the impossibility, of imagining life in times of peace, after war and after terror. And drones are an excellent example of how a war technology has been repurposed in the entertainment context. It's now sold as a toy. As much as video games are also examples of the ongoing negotiation between the war and the entertainment industries. Patrick Krogan has been discussing these connections and has proposed that these are drawn together by what he calls the war on contingency, that leads the development of systems where all possibilities for action and movement are already given. So in both gamification and QS technologies, there is no possibility really to enter data that is not already expected. There is no possibility for unexpected movement and action. We could say there is not really any possibility for playing with these tools. The Nike Plus wristband or the calories counter app, for example, are not exactly games to play with, but mostly games to keep up to date or updated with your own data. So if we accept Nike's statement that life is movement, then we can also argue that there is not much movement or play and therefore not much life in the ways in which we are supposed to engage with gamification and QS technologies. So in Drone Plus, in this project, we have not tried to oppose this rather static vision of life. We have definitely not proposed a form of resistance against gamification or QS. We have tried instead to find other forms of life, other forms of unpredictability, and other kinds of movement, such as the movement performed by a drone that has pretty much failed most of the time to respond to the instructions it was given. Drone Plus is an attempt to question the problematic notion of the self that Quantified Self is trying to quantify, getting back to the initial problem of the dualism and oppositions often discussed in regards to QS and gamification models and to the control exercised by video game companies. Both me and the group Haus think that we could start by questioning what sort of data comes to count as our self or our own life. What is the logic for its organization and ordering? What definitions of life can we assume from these tools? And then what other forms of life we can imagine? And finally, how we could play with them. Thank you.